So welcome to Unbroken, the safe place for male survivor podcast. Because every male survivor deserves hope, healing, support, and a BMW. And here's your male survivor, leadership coach, and hypnotherapist, Thomas Edward. Unbroken. All right. This is a safe place for male survivors. All right, guys. So here we are, another new year. Shout out to my peeps over in Ireland. Just great to be able to work with you guys. Thank you guys so much for, I'm going to say just the encouragement to keep going. This is not, I'm going to say, an easy space to be in many times. And then sometimes, I'm finding out kind of lately, after doing this for 20 something years, that, people pop in, they pop out, and usually they're trying to figure out what they can get out of you. And so, I had some people when I first started this in the early beginning that I would reach out to and say, hey, let's collaborate, blah, 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 just pretty much, crickets. Crickets was pretty much the idea. And then now when you've got something really going and rolling and things are, bipping and bopping and moving, then it's like, oh, then they want to come in and it's like, oh yeah, let's collab. I'm like, look, Mr. Virgo here, right? And so I am the person, if you cape with me, look, I'm loyal, right? But when you mess up like that and you come in like, nope, sorry, deal off, right? Keep it stepping. So anyway, shout out to those of you that kind of just sent me some encouragement, tell me to keep going, keep doing this. You're saying that it's, just hearing the different stories and things are helping you. And that's kind of the whole point. We even had some people who actually joined, some of the cohorts, which is great. That's awesome. It would be great to get to the point because we do a new start every month, the beginning of the month. And I would love to have those spaces, filled, right? The more guys that we get in there. The saying was, I don't know how true it is, but each person that you influence and help will then influence and help another 10,000 in their lifetime. So if that's true, I just think about, wow, the number of, we're in the millions. We're in the millions, already, which is great. And because there's more than 20 million of us out there, and that's in the United States alone. So I think this is a very important work. Thank you for the alumni out there, those guys that are alumni of the program. We had somebody coming through who had some financial issues. You guys, man, you grouped together and you helped that person to actually get some coaching sessions. So, I don't know, just kudos to you guys for the heart that you have. So you've had a chance to go through the program and, and I reached out like, hey, there's somebody else who really needs some help. Can we, give this person some coaching sessions? And you guys stepped up and you did it, right? And that's what I love about this, because we're creating community, we're creating family. And I hope one day I can get to the point where we can just do like a big giant, just like a reunion. And even though maybe you guys haven't all met each other, but like to be in one place. That's my hope, right? That's my dream. All right. So today we are dealing, and I'm kind of calling it Haunted by Nightfall. And so actually we're going to have an opportunity to hear part of Diego's story, which I think is really important for us to hear. And then as you hear it, maybe there are things that relate to your journey, being a male survivor of childhood, adolescent, whatever, sexual abuse. And if so, remember, if anything kind of touches you, feel free to reach out. I always say you got to do something. Now, the reason I've entitled it that, Haunted by Nightfall, is because, nighttime should actually be, I'm going to say, a place of rest, right? So the place where the world just kind of quiets, where your mind gets to settle, where your body sinks into safety. But for many male survivors of childhood sexual abuse, that night is when the body actually remembers. And so the trauma didn't just happen in childhood, but it's returning. It's returning in fragments and shadows, sensations, dreams, and then the sudden panic that hits, right as you're about to fall asleep. And that moment where the body says, don't close your eyes, right? This is when things happen. And so then sleep becomes, I'm going to say, a battleground, because the threat came when the world was quiet. Night wasn't really safety. It was actually vulnerability. And so for some male survivors, the abuse came into their room, into that sacred space. And so we're going to talk a little bit like Diego. So for others like Diego, that danger happened possibly away from home, maybe during nights spent with an extended family. Maybe there were cousins. Maybe it was a sleepover. And the thing was, there was no protector. There was no oversight. And there was no way to escape. And when trauma imprints, I'm going to say in the nighttime hours like that, the body associates darkness with exposure and sleep with surrender. So in this episode, what we're going to do is we're just going to step back a little bit into Diego's story. I remember working with Diego, and we're just going to talk a little bit how, nighttime for him became a doorway, I'm going to say, back to the past. And so to a past, of course, that he never chose. And then how healing came, not by forcing sleep, but by just actually teaching his body that nighttime no longer actually meant danger. That's interesting. I guess what I like about this is that each individual is different. Each male survivor is different. So when I'm working with them and I'm coaching them, this is it's never a cookie cutter program. So we go through some of the same things, the courses, whatever, online courses, those different things, but they bring up different situations, scenarios, whatever, for each individual. And so we're always having to tweak. We're always having to say, okay, so this doesn't work for you, then let's try something else. And that's what I enjoy about it, because it always keeps you on your toes. All right, let's listen to Diego's story here.
My name is Diego. I used to think I just had bad sleep, like some people have anxiety or allergies. I'd laugh it off, joke about being a night owl. But the truth is, I wasn't awake because I liked being awake. I stayed up because sleeping felt like crossing enemy lines. When I was around 9 or 10, my mom used to drop me and my brother off at my aunt's place while she worked late shifts. My older cousin, Marco, lived there. He was 17, athletic, popular, the kind of guy everyone said I should look up to. At first, it felt cool to be around him. He'd play video games with me, let me stay up late, make me feel like I mattered. Then it shifted. The nights got quiet. The house would fall asleep. He'd pull out blankets on the floor in the living room and say, "Let's sleep out here so we can keep playing." I thought it was fun. I thought he wanted to hang out with me. But that's when things started happening. It wasn't violent. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, whispered, slow. He'd wait until everyone was asleep, wait until I couldn't move, wait until I froze. I remember looking at the ceiling fan spinning and thinking, if I stay still, maybe he'll stop. I never said no. I never pushed him off. I didn't even understand what no meant in that moment. I just froze. Every time. My body learned that night wasn't safe. Sleep wasn't safe. Stillness wasn't safe. When morning came, everything looked normal again. He'd joke around, hit me on the arm, call me little man, and I learned something even worse. Nighttime was danger. Daytime was pretending. I didn't tell anyone. Not because I didn't want to, because I didn't have language. I didn't even know what happened. I just knew that when the sun set, my body braced for something I couldn't name. Fast forward to adulthood. I'm 38 years old now. I have a house. I have my own bed. I live alone. There's no cousin, no threats, no reason to stay up until 3 a.m. scrolling on my phone, pacing the kitchen, falling asleep on the couch with the TV on. But my body still acts like the danger is coming. I sleep with the lights on. I keep a weapon next to my bed, not for defense, but for comfort. Sometimes I wake up drenched in sweat, heart pounding with images I can't fully see, but I can fully feel. Other nights, I don't sleep at all. I stay awake until sunrise because somehow the light feels like protection. Like once the sun is up, nothing can touch me. And friends laugh because I say I hate sleeping, but they don't know the truth. I'm not afraid of dreams. I'm afraid of the dark, because the dark feels like being 9 years old again with no one to protect me. When I finally started coaching, I thought we were going to work on stress or anxiety. But the first time I tried to talk about sleep, I broke down. I didn't know why. I just knew the night wasn't just night. It was memory. It was a place my body never left. And I'm tired of being haunted.
So that is part of Diego's story. You know, each time I have these read, because these were actually written by the guys themselves, I am just so impressed when I think about where they first started off and then where they are, and now having the words and the ability to articulate what was going on for them in those moments. And I think that's one of the greatest powers that you can have, like to actually be able to explain and articulate what was going on with you, what you were, experiencing. And so shout out to you, Diego, for that. So what Diego describes is something that we see often. And so when trauma happens at night, the body doesn't file it away as a memory. It often engraves it as a rule. And so that rule is, don't sleep, don't trust darkness, and don't let your guard down. And so his adult insomnia wasn't laziness, bad habits, or poor discipline. It was actually survival. And I know you guys keep hearing me say this over and over again, is that our body, our brain, our mind goes into survival mode, survival strategy. And so here's the part I'm going to say that most men never realize that have the situation like Diego, is that nighttime trauma creates a body that believes vulnerability is equal to danger even decades later. And that's why I said, man, this brain that we have is just so amazing, complex, and wonderful, because here this is 30 something years later, and your brain is like as if it's just happening now. So let's break this down. I'm going to say from the foundation. So we always start out with the root, right? And of course, the CSA is the root, right, for this. So the childhood sexual abuse. Now, the abuse didn't happen at home, but it happened in an environment that should have been safe. Family, sleepovers, bonding, those different type of things, being around your relatives. But this created, I'm going to say, a unique trauma message. And one of those messages was that danger doesn't come from enemies, but it actually comes from the people that you trust. And that can be, I'm going to say, one of the most frightening and deadliest and complex things. Like, you're in a place where supposedly you are safe, you're supposed to be protected, because these are the people who love you. And it turns out to be the total opposite. So nighttime isn't rest. It's when no one is actually watching. And as he talked about that stillness, the stillness isn't peace, it's really paralysis. And so because he froze during the abuse, his nervous system actually paired. And what did it paired with? Well, it said that immobilization plus darkness plus quiet actually equals threat. And that's why sometimes you'll find survivors that are dealing with this. And I remember even going through this, myself, like you'll sleep with the radio or the television or computer on or something like that, because then that's not total quiet or stillness, right? There's something in the background that's moving and making a movement. And so therefore you feel a little bit safe. And so his body learned to avoid actually entering that state again. And so when we think about childhood trauma, it doesn't just hurt, but it trains the nervous system on how to survive. That's why we said we are in survival mode. All right, so let's talk a little bit about our reinforcing factors, what was going on with him. So as Diego grew older, like you said, he was 38, life actually kept validating the trauma response for him. So staying awake made him actually feel that he was in control. So if that's something that makes you feel in control, staying awake for you is going to become kind of the normal or your new normal that you're going to fall back on. So he would do things like, late night gaming, even drinking, doom scrolling, binging, whatever was going to give him some type of distraction. And being alone at night actually felt safer than actually sleeping next to someone. So he said, yeah, I'm alone, got my house, but for him, that's kind of his place, his palace. Now, the funny thing is that I remember when we were working with him, he would say that, people praised him, for being the night owl, kind of just, which was really just reinforcing the avoidance. And even adult relationships, were reinforced by this pattern, and which was very challenging for him to actually develop those relationships. So he said that, when he would have partners, significant others, they would complain that he emotionally checked out at night. During the day, fine, but like he was a total different person, Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde in the evenings. And, like you said, he avoided, sleepovers, and not just sleepovers, even he said when they would go on, like business trips, those different type of things, it was really challenging for him. And so let's just say, for instance, and it depends if you've ever been on business trips, and then sometimes you'll get the double. So there's two beds there. And so, but that would freak him out, even though he would have his own bed. So he would try to avoid even overnight trips. No intimacy at night. Okay. Now some of you guys are like, whoa, what? Yeah. No intimacy at night. That was a really challenge for him. And so for him, if the intimacy was going to take place, it would have to take place during the daytime. Okay. So anything involving after dark for him made him feel vulnerable. And so the world actually kept rewarding his coping strategies without even seeing the wound that was beneath them. So then what were the adult impacts for him? So the consequences weren't just poor sleep, which was one of the things, but they were also, I would say, identity level. So I want you to think about now when we talk about, okay, what would be my identity that I would start getting from this? So insomnia and chronic fatigue, right? So you start getting those labels because he's struggling to rest, right? He's never kind of awakened like refreshed, because for him that nighttime, of course, is going to be the vulnerable time. Hypervigilance at night. All right. So this is the time when your body's supposed to be at rest, but sound sensitivity, pacing. He would get up and he would actually check the locks to make sure that the locks on the door were locked. Then the other adult, of course, impacts like relationship strain. Like we said, he couldn't fall asleep next to a partner at nighttime, right? avoiding staying over, whether it could be at a relative's house, those different type of things. And then he had work dysfunction. So you might have not thought about this, but for him, he had an over-reliance on caffeine. Okay, so 5-hour energy, those different type of things. So late night productivity cycles. Some of the other adult, I'm going to say, impacts for him was emotional avoidance. So nighttime actually became his escape time, through dissociation or trying to dissociation. And then when he did finally get some sleep, it would result in nightmares and flashbacks. So now the dreams weren't memories, but they were fragments of the fear. So oftentimes we think that, nightmares are random, but I'm going to tell you they are not. And it's interesting for those of you that are doing the program, and we're on the module talking about lucid dreaming and actually being able to control our dreams when we do have those abuse situations come up actually in our dreams where it's kind of repeating. Very powerful tool. But what we realize is that oftentimes nightmares are not random. It's like the brain is trying to resolve some different things. And so the body's trying to, finish a story that it never got a chance to resolve. And so for those of you that are actually doing the lucid dream module, that's kind of one of the pieces of that lucid dreaming is we are helping the brain to actually finish a story that never got resolved. So we're actually creating the ending for it. So what are some of the neuroscience insights? So I'm going to say for this episode and talking about Diego, we focus on, I'm going to say, sleep stage trauma encoding. You're like, whoa, Coach T, what's that? Never heard about that before. I can't remember when I was working on my master's in psychology and counseling, we had just a couple of weeks, of the sleep stage trauma encoding. But so pretty much kind of what it looks like is you've got your REM sleep plus what's known as trauma intrusion. And so what happens is, in REM sleep, of course, is when the emotional memories are actually processed. It's the time when the brain actually attempts to integrate the trauma. And then we've got that amygdala. Now, by now, you guys, you could probably write a whole page on me about the amygdala because we always talk about it, but it is an important piece. So the amygdala actually becomes active while the body is paralyzed. Now, if you guys have ever experienced, the type of dreams, because your body protects you, right? So you don't, get out and, fall over or whatever. So if you've ever had those nightmares where you're in your dream and you're paralyzed and your body can't move, maybe someone's chasing you. I've even had the ones where I'm conscious, right? I'm sleeping, and I know that I can't move pieces of my body because that's what the body does. It protects you by, kind of keeping you from getting up and doing stuff that might actually harm you. And those are just some of the freakiest dreams that you can ever have, especially in the dream. If there's you feel like there's a dark figure or something in the corner, and in the dream you're in the bed and you can't move. Whoa, man. Okay. But anyway, that's what we mean when we're talking about the REM sleep plus the trauma actually intrusion. So for trauma survivors with nighttime abuse, this REM, so REM, REM sleep, right, paralysis feels identical to the freeze response. Okay, hopefully this is starting to come together for you guys when we've gone through the 4 F's, all right? So the freeze, the fawn, the fight, the flight, and these are all just different survival modes, but freeze is one of those modes. So imagine that you froze during the sexual abuse. Now here you are, REM sleep, paralysis, can't move, and now you have the same identical feeling that you did during the sexual abuse. Okay, that would definitely freak us out. So the brain avoids actually entering REM because entering REM, it feels like it's returning to the moment of the abuse. And so that might be one of the reasons that it's actually challenging for us to actually fall asleep. you get a little bit jealous because people are like, oh yeah, as soon as my head hits the pillow, I'm out. And but not for some of us, because it's like, ooh, if my head hits the pillow, that means I'm going to have to dream, I'm going to be in REM, the paralysis, and that just freaks our brain out. And so then what does this do? Well, this leads to fragmented sleep cycles. So we don't have whole sleep cycles, where you go down to the deep sleep and then you come up to the REM sleep. So you're doing kind of the roller coaster, but that doesn't happen for you. So you have fragmented sleep cycles. And then, of course, we have REM suppression, right? Because the paralysis and those different type of things are going on through the REM, the dream, and so we don't. Or we have night terrors. And some of you that have experienced night terrors, you know what those are like. So then that means that because we're not having that complete cycle, we're waking up like maybe between, 2 or 4 a.m. And then what we do is we have cortisol, the cortisol spike cycle, okay, which everyone knows that cortisol stress, right? And so then what happens is we have I'm going to call it memory reconsolidation failure. So we still got this fragmented stuff. We're not able to put everything together. And so it's like this mystery just continues on and on. And then also, I'm going to say from the neuroscience, what's going on, the cortisol rhythm reversal. So healthy body, right? You would normally have, we're going to say high cortisol maybe in the morning, low cortisol at night. But then when you have this traumatized body, it reverses. So now you have the high cortisol at night when you should be sleeping, the stress, and then you have the low cortisol in the morning. Well, why is that? Well, that's because nighttime became the danger window, right? So then the body actually reverses it. Then we have sensory memory triggers, right? Okay, now you're like, what is that? That's just, okay, so just think about this. What would be a sensory memory trigger for us if this is what we're experiencing, right? Well, the brain's going to encode sensory anchors. And guess what our main one is going to be? It's going to be darkness. That's going to be one of our main triggers, right? Then silence. For some of us, if it's silent, it freaks us out, right? And I'll be the first to admit I sleep with the fan on. I do. I really do. So I'm sharing with you that I've experienced this before. Or for maybe some of us, depending on what happened, the abuse, maybe blankets are on the floor, or maybe we also have other anchors like, someone breathing next to you or nearby you. And so that freaks you out. And now the body doesn't remember what happened, but it remembers when it happened, right? So that darkness really is the anchor. All right. So I think you guys got quite a bit when we're talking about the haunting in the night. All right. So how did we help Diego? What did we do? What was some of the strategy to help him to work through some of these things? All right. So our work really wasn't about fixing insomnia. And so it was about teaching Diego's body that night is no longer the scene of the crime. Okay. So we're flipping it here a little bit. And so some of the key strategies that I actually used with Diego was, one, that safety before sleep. So instead of actually forcing sleep, we would actually create what's known as a safety ritual, right? So for him, and this is why I said, this is why it's important, I believe, at least for me, to try and keep up on the neuroscience. You'll notice, I think it's, I can't remember the commercial, but now they have these different type of things. You can put on hoodies or pajamas or blankets, and they're weighted. And there's something about that weighted feeling that touches the proprioceptors, of course, on the skin and those different type of things that actually gives it this feeling of comfort. So it's like a hug, a blanket. I think of it from that perspective. So we use that. We use it weighted blankets. Then we use the deep exhale cycle. So those of you who have done the 4-6 with me, you know what the deep exhale cycle is. Then we did the hands on chest, plus stomach grounding. I'm always amazed at just some of the things that I'm going to say maybe older generations or that our parents intuitively did for us. Like when you'd have a tummy ache, whatever, and your mom, she would just come up and she would just gently, rub your stomach, And then you start, wow, it actually did start feeling a little bit better, even though it probably wasn't, killing the bad chicken that you ate, whatever, that evening, but it made it feel better, right? Once again, the proprioceptors there gave you that comforter. And so what we did was, for him, we did hand on chest and we did stomach grounding. So those two vital spots, giving him comfort there, of course, with the weighted blanket. Then we did low warm lighting so that it wasn't totally dark, but it was to the point where you could still kind of just, fall asleep, but enough where you didn't feel like it's just complete darkness. Okay. And then soft sound. Okay. So silence. Some people will use white noise. I use a fan for white noise, and not just the noise. For me, I have asthma, so having the cool air blow over my face just always helped me. But I always realized that because of that, when I would go to sleep, if I was in a closed room and it was just like pure dark, I would feel like I was suffocating. Because that was kind of reliving part of the experience there, right? And so that was really important. So we weren't sedating his body. We were just trying to signal the body that it was safe. Now, the next thing we did was transition ritual. So instead of going from stimulation to sleep, we actually created a bridge. Okay, and so for him, what we did was, this is when I started using water, right? So had him take a hot shower. After the hot shower, just do a little bit of gentle stretching, okay? And the gentle stretching, I have him gentle stretch either with a soft light lamp or a candle, right? Because there's something about that. I can't remember. It's the frequency of the light. Like as the sun is setting, it turns certain colors, which starts to trigger the mind, actually calm down the mind. So we do the same thing, but we would make it part of the transition ritual. And then I had him write down actually one fear. Okay, so write one fear down and then close the journal physically. Okay, because for him, he had actually a dream journal next to his bed because to help him to remember some of the things. And so what this did was this would tell his nervous system we're actually winding down intentionally. Right, so we're intentionally winding down. That's what this transition ritual was for. The next thing we did was we separated, I'm going to say, the night from the past night. And so he replaced the fear rituals with ownership rituals. Now, I know you guys are probably saying, Coach T, where did you with all this stuff? Well, okay, I've been doing this for 20-something years. And so then developing different patterns, reading different books, and just incorporating things that worked for other guys. It gives you a plethora of different type of things to try, right? So for this one, when we're talking about, well, what does it mean to replace the fear rituals with ownership rituals? Well, one, actually choosing the sleep location. That was one thing I realized when I was working with him and in the scenarios that he would share with me, that he never had the power to choose the sleeping location, right? So remember he talked about, his cousin, they're building the tent, whatever. And, the cousin is the one who's saying, hey, this is what we're going to do. But then by allowing Diego to choose the sleep location, it's giving him ownership. Changing bedding textures. This is really important. I remember I had one client that I was working with, and so for him, he would freak out when sheets would touch him, especially if they were silk, right? Because then that would take him actually back to the actual memory, just that texture. And so that's why we had to figure out, okay, so do we need to change, bedding texture here, okay? Or moving the blanket off the floor. That was something for him. That was a trigger. So that's what we did. And then, sleeping elevated and not flat. Okay, so that was also an issue. And so what happens is that the body has to learn. It has to learn that this is not the place where that happened. Okay, that's all we're doing when we're talking about these transitions, these different type of rituals and things. And then I say the final one we did was processing nighttime memories in the daylight. Okay, so we didn't process this trauma at night. We processed it when his nervous system could actually handle it. Because nighttime for him would be when he would freak out, going back to that. So it's like, okay, so when can we process this? All right, so we processed that trauma, okay, so during the day when we know that his nervous system could actually handle it. And then what happened is the message started to become for him that night is actually for rest and day is for remembering. Okay, so do you notice how we switched it? We switched it. Okay, so night is for rest. Day is for remembering those things. All right. I hope you guys are getting a lot out of this or something out of this, or that it's, hitting maybe something that maybe you've experienced. All right. So when we talk about the coaching, what was the resiliency? I'm going to say example. So one breakthrough was that night, of course, changed everything for him. So I remember we were on a call earlier that day, and we were talking about why the silence at night terrified him. And he said, well, it's not just the dark, he said, but, the silence. And he said that silence feels like the moment right before he moved. Okay, so for him, for the abuse, when it was getting ready to happen, silence, no movement, just right before things were getting ready to happen. And so that was key. So it wasn't just the darkness, but it was that anticipation. That's what the silence would bring. And so that night, instead of actually trying to sleep, he would sit on the edge of the bed with his feet grounded. We had a small lamp on, and then we would just have him kind of whisper out loud, "I'm not 9. No one is coming." Okay, and so he repeated that. He would do his breath work, breathing slowly. Then he'd lay down, not totally flat, but somewhat elevated. And it wasn't to sleep, but it was to rest, right? So we assigned it a different meaning. And so when you lay down, it's not to sleep, it's to just rest, to allow your body to rest. And I remember he said later, he says, man, that was the first night that I didn't feel hunted, right? Just from doing those simple things. So sleep didn't happen instantly, but safety did. And that's what we were achieving for. That's what we were trying to work toward. Yo, shout out to you, Diego, out there, doing well, keep going well. So as we close this one and think about, I'm going to say kind of a reflection and a recap, because we always do that. So for those of you that come in at the last minute and you don't listen to the whole podcast, at least you can get the information at the end with the closing reflection and recap. All right. So for those of us, when we're talking about this nighttime trauma, it doesn't end, of course, when the morning comes, because the imprints in the body's relationship to the rest is there. But your body can actually learn a new story. That's what we're doing with Diego. We were just trying to teach his body a new story. So I want you to think about, if this is something that you are dealing with, I want to give you a couple of reflection questions, prompt questions to think about. And that is, what does your body believe night means? Okay. What does your body associate night with? Do you stay awake to feel safe or to avoid feeling? Okay. Which is just another form of dissociation. Okay. And then why would nighttime look like if it belonged to you again? So what would it actually look like if you could reclaim this? What would your nighttime look like if it belonged to you once again, like with Diego, if you finally had ownership of it? So the abuse happened at night outside his home, which left for him this vulnerability imprint. And so his body learned stillness, because stillness, right, was equal, of course, to danger. And so in his adult life, this is where the insomnia was coming from. This is where the hypervigilance, the panic, and even the avoidance. But that was because of the neuroscience. That's why we dove into the neuroscience, talking about the REM trauma loop, talking about the cortisol reversal, talking about the sensory triggers. And then that's what we did. We gave them strategies, right? And to me, it's like I had a individual who was working with me, and he had been, doing whatever, therapy, whatever, for like 5 years. And so when he got to me and he started working with me, I'm like, okay, but what strategies did you have when you came out, when you were discharged? And he's like, I didn't have any strategies. I'm like, okay, so then that's what we need to do. We need to give you some strategies. And so for Diego, we were creating those safety rituals. We were creating environment resets, and we were doing that daytime processing because that's when he felt safe. So, okay, let's process during the daytime. And then for him, that's when the breakthrough came, right? Reclaiming the night as present time, not just memory. Yeah, that was the cool thing. Like I said, this is one of the reasons I enjoy doing the work that I do. And that's why I said it's not cookie cutter. It's never cookie cutter. Each person is individual. And so that's the fun thing about this, is that it keeps us on our P's and Q's or toes or whatever, because we're trying to figure out what is going to work for the individual. Some of the things are the same, but many of them are not. And I believe that's what makes this program so powerful and so transformative, right? And that's why as that Virgo, I'm there with you, loyal, hanging in there with you, so we can get the results that you actually want to see. All right, guys, hope you have a great evening, night, next day. Remember, if you have any questions and you're listening to this and you're like, man, I just don't know where I can go, all you got to do is just go up to the website, right? bettermalesurvivors.com. Send me an email, all right? I read the emails that you send me. So first of all, know that. And then if there's something that you want to know, then ask me a question and I will reply. I always tell people I reply at least within 24 to 36 hours. It's usually faster. It's usually faster than that, but you can kind of give myself that leeway if I'm traveling, whatever, or something like that. And I'm going to tell you where that comes for me. I remember when I was working through things, and you would, send an email or something and you would never hear back. And my whole idea was like, what the hell are you going to put a reply button up or email up there if you're not going to actually answer the email? What's the point? Right. So that's kind of a personal, right? Maybe that's a bad memory. I'm not sure, but that's kind of personal with me. So then my deal is, if someone sends me an email, especially with a question or whatever, I always just reply, either say, hey, thanks for sharing that. Or if they had a question, then I try and actually to answer that question, so they know that they've been heard, that they've been seen, and that they have been validated, because that's one of the things that I think that is really important for each and every one of us. All right, guys, like Diego, don't be afraid, right? Hopefully this touched some of those out there that actually needed this. And all right, until our next podcast, all right, be safe and remember, do something.